when I was 60, stopped teaching as a professor. I retired from teaching, and it suddenly dawned on me that I was going to die. I mean, up to about 60, dying was what other people did. You know, it had nothing to do with me. But when I got to 60, I realized I was going to die, and it really frightened me and scared me. And I wondered what I was going to do about that. And I decided, rather than go to therapy, I decided that I would confront it, face up to it, learn about it, study it, try and find out for myself why I was so apprehensive, so scared.
Chris Palmer, welcome to the Dine with Dignity podcast, the second one. So we are off and running. Thank you so much for agreeing to join us here.
Oh gosh, Dan, the honor is mine. I'm just delighted to be with you. I'm a big fan of your book, and thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. As I'm a fan of yours, I can't wait to get into the topic here and the discussion. But first, where are we catching you from? Where are you today?
I am at my home in my study in Bethesda, Maryland. I know you're up in Ontario, Toronto.
Toronto, yep. When I was in the Navy, which we'll get into a little bit, our shared Navy service, though, I was in D.C. in the Pentagon for a while and know Bethesda quite well. So nice part of the country. Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, for the listeners, we're speaking with Chris Palmer, who we've known each other for a little bit now, but I didn't really know your full extensive background. I knew, through the book we'll get into, but in preparing for the show, I got your CV and wow, how impressive. You're an author, speaker, filmmaker, conservationist, educator, professor, grandfather, husband, end-of-life activist. Wow. We could have many podcasts. We'll be focused today on the latter part there, the end-of-life activist, but wow. And I know that you're focusing more of your energies now on the profound frontiers of aging, death, and dying. But I do want to get into a little bit of your CV. I did print it off. We'll get into the meat probably of the topic today is your book, Achieving a Good Death, A Practical Guide to End of Life, which I read a couple of months ago. Wow, how impressive. I mean, much more than a practical guide. I know you've got to title it in some way, but we'll get into some of the chapters and really the meaningful effort that you put in and just wonderful. But for you, before you got into end of life, you had a 35-year career as a filmmaker. You spearheaded production of more than 300 hours of original programming, primetime television, IMAX, and in doing so, you came across some legends: Robert Redford, worked with Paul Newman, Jane Fonda, Ted Turner. Like I say, that could be a whole nother podcast in itself. And I love in your CV where you put in along the way, you swam with dolphins and whales, came face to face with sharks in Kodiak, camped with wolf packs, waded hip deep through the Everglades. So you're quite the...
Some of your viewers may have seen our IMAX film on dolphins, won an Oscar nomination. So I spent many years making wildlife films. That's right. Yeah.
Terrific.
Yeah, it was fun.
You also have advanced degrees from University College London, Harvard University. I note you practice handstands for exercise.
Dude, I'm 78 and I still do handstands every day. And I work out every day for at least an hour. I play tennis almost every day. Like your dad. Your dad was a keen tennis player. That's the thing I noticed from your book. So your dad and I had that very much in common. I love tennis. And so I'm very physically active. And it's because, Dan, I don't have many years left. And I've got heart disease. I had a prostatectomy. I had prostate cancer. And so I'm living as hard as I can because the time is running out on me.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about that as you do in your book about the meaningful life. And I think one of your people that you interviewed or you talked to about your book has that end of date for their life and how when you have that, when you're coming to the end or near the end of life and how that meaningful aspect of living comes into play, which, as I said, we'll get into. Before we leave your CV, though, I had to mention the 2 decades as a Royal Navy officer.
Yeah.
As you know, I was in the U.S. Navy for similarly 25 years. So we've got that shared interest and service.
Thank you for your service. That's wonderful. Yeah.
And likewise, yours was much more varied than mine. Mine was primarily just in aviation, a little bit with the Pentagon, but you did quite a bit.
Yeah.
And you've published 10 books.
Yeah.
And I think the most recent was 2024 was Achieving a Good Death. Is that correct?
It was.
Is that
Yeah,
your last one?
it was. It's this book here. Yep. It's my latest. Yep.
Terrific. And that's I think where we'll kick off the substance here. So I know in reading your book, which once again is wonderful, how you combine both the practicalities of conversations and living with and aging and dying with just some, the sincerity, the sensitivity, and the breaking of the taboo. I believe that's probably one of, I think, as you mentioned in your book, one of the primary purposes for writing the book. And you go into how you got intrigued by death, which I'm sure that's sensitive for you, but if you don't mind, how did you turn that into the fascination into action in writing the book?
Yeah, well, Dan, I'm 78. When I was 60, stopped teaching as a professor. I retired from teaching, and I suddenly dawned on me that I was going to die. I mean, up to about 60, dying was what other people did. It had nothing to do with me. But when I got to 60, I realized I was going to die, and it really frightened me and scared me. And I wondered what I was going to do about that. And I decided, rather than go to therapy, I decided that I would confront it, face up to it, learn about it, study it, try and find out for myself why I was so apprehensive, so scared, which I did. And that led to the book, and I formed a death and dying group. We've been meeting now for 10 years and things like this. Okay. And but the other thing was that I saw my parents die and my brothers die, and they died very badly. My mother was a vibrant, warm woman, and she was 4 years in a nursing home with a peg feed. Awful. And my father died of prostate cancer, and awful. My three brothers, including my twin brother Jonathan, all died early deaths from heart disease. I'm very vulnerable to heart disease. That's why I'm on a plant-based diet. I exercise every day. I mean, I make lifestyle choices that help me postpone death as long as I can. But watching them die was horrible. I made a mess of it. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know about death, and I just messed it up. And so I got into death because I wanted to do a better job myself. I wanted to show my three daughters and my 9 grandchildren how to die well. And there's a skill in that, which your dad learned, which I learned that from reading your book, Wingman. So that's how I got into it, because I was scared. I wanted to learn about it. I wanted to do a better job myself. I wanted to set a better example of how to deal with senescence, the end of life, with more competence, with more capability.
Well, that's wonderfully articulated. As a society, as I said, death is such a taboo topic. We don't get into that. We don't know about it, and then you write about it in your book, Achieving a Good Death, about how some of the fallacies of Hollywood and books, they glamorize it, or it's but it's not
sanitize
real.
It. Yeah.
Exactly. I had a completely different experience with both my parents. Though my mom died quite young, relative. She was 61 to pancreatic cancer.
Yeah.
And she was able to die in her own bed.
Yeah.
Overlooking the Pacific Ocean, very peaceful. And I was with her at her side.
Yeah.
She taught me not to fear death. I was fearful of it beforehand, but having lived it with her, and of course, died at that age, and I was 30 years old. I was relatively young when you look at hopefully a long life, and just seeing that peacefulness. And then with my father, who went through the medical assistance and dying process, we had time, we had planning. But similarly, I was with him, as was my sister and my brother-in-law, as he took his last breath in our arms.
Yeah.
And through him, I learned not to fear dying. It wasn't easy by any means. I mean, he had Parkinson's late stages, as you know from reading the book. And certainly there were difficult periods of time and struggles and pain. But at the end, it was a real beautiful process. So I'm sorry to hear in your instance of 5, I mean, both your parents and 3 siblings, but taking that experience and being able to turn it into positive action, and through the organization that you founded, and I'm sure other things that you're doing, as well as writing the book and helping others shatter that taboo. So that's wonderful, Chris.
So Dan, you mentioning your mom and dad gives me an opportunity, if I may, just to say that your book Wingman, Escorting My Father to a Death with Dignity. One of the best books I've read on death and dying, and I just warmly commend you for it. It's very different from my book. Your book is very personal and poignant and moving, and really it's just a beautiful read. And I just want to commend you for it and encourage our viewers to get hold of it and read it. So I just since you were talking about your mom and dad, I just wanted to put in that plug for your outstanding book, Wingman.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, candidly, it's humbling to hear that because, unlike you, that, you've written 10 books, accomplished. For myself, I had a couple books, but they were, small time. And Wingman came about because my father, on the eve of his death, turned to me and he said, "Danny, tell the story. You're in charge of the story. Give others the chance I had." And so I felt, at the time, I didn't really know what that was, what it meant, what it was going to lead to, because I was just focused on what would be the last hours of time with my dad left. And it wasn't until later when I started writing, primarily just cathartically and part of the grieving process, and then realized the importance of the education and advocacy for end-of-life choice. But it's really, my father's story, of course, our journey together to some degree. So to hear that, thank you so much, Chris.
Yeah.
To me, I just think of a tribute to my dad.
Yeah, I mean, to honor your dad for a moment. I mean, I love that. He said to you, and you write about this so eloquently in your book. He turned to you just before he died and said, as you just said, "Tell my story." And I want to mention this because, in a way, he was asking you to write his ethical will, his legacy letter. And this is something I talk about in my book, as you know. And I think writing an ethical will is so important. An ethical will, for those of you listeners who may not be familiar with the term, an ethical will, or also called a legacy letter, as you know, is a letter written to your survivors. Now, you wrote the book, Wingman, but in a sense, it was an ethical letter because an ethical will, in the book, the values your dad stood for, you had a tumultuous relationship with him. It's fascinating to read about. And I think the way I view your book is you putting down in writing your memories and feelings about your dad and his death and his chosen death and how he did it, how he went to Switzerland to take advantage of medically and dying there. It's just a wonderful expression of love. And so I just want to I want to make the link between your book and an ethical will, because I want our listeners to think about writing an ethical will, because it's a great thing to do. It's a letter to your loved ones, describing why you love them, why they're important, why they matter, how your lives interacted, and so on. And in my book, I give instructions how to write it and give examples on ethical will. So I just wanted to draw that link between your book, Wingman, and the idea of a notion of an ethical will.
Thank you. And speaking of your book, and as you say, you write about that in one of the chapters of Achieving a Good Life, is shattering, we've talked already a couple of times about shattering the taboo. So writing the ethical will is one aspect, but how do you start that conversation with loved ones, with your
very hard
siblings,
very
with your
hard.
children?
Yeah, very hard because immediately people's reaction is, "Oh, don't talk to him about that," because they worry that if maybe by talking about it, they're going to bring it about, which is garbage. Because when we give kids sex education, it doesn't mean they're going to get pregnant. I mean, same with talking about death and dying. Doesn't mean you're going to die because you talk about it. And your question is, how do you break the taboo? Well, I think what I tell people is try and use stories. Just think back to an uncle or aunt or a sibling who died and say to them, you remember our Uncle Jack was in the ICU. He had tubes coming out of every orifice in his body. He was intubated. He couldn't talk. He had a ventilator on. He had a peg feed, blah, blah, blah. How did you feel about that? Mom, Dad, what did you think? Is that how you want to die, or do you want something different? In other words, one way to break this down is to think of stories in the family that you can relate to and bring them up and say, what do you think about how Aunt Susan died? Did she do the right thing? She asked not to have CPR. Is that what you want to? You don't want to have your CPR if you're close to death. This is the way to bring it up. And I think the other thing, another approach here, Dan, is you can say to your mom and dad or your siblings or your children, I need your help. I'm bothered by this. I want to get more on top of this. I want to have more say in what happens, and I worry that if I just leave things as they're going, no one will know what to do. If I were to die, if I'd hit by a bus tomorrow, you, Mum, wouldn't know what I really wanted. If I was in a persistent vegetative state, what would you do? So I think asking for help is another way to sort of draw people in, so they won't say, "Oh no, don't talk to me about that." Try and break through. But it's not easy. It's not easy because children don't want to talk to their parents about it because they worry their parents will think maybe they want our money, or they worry about it. They say, "Oh, let's just avoid it." And parents don't want to their kids about it because they don't want their kids to worry about it. Doctors don't want to talk about it because they are often scared of death. That's often why they went into became doctors in the first place, because they're petrified of death. And so it's much easier for a doctor to say to one of their patients, "Oh, look, let's try another treatment." It's really a cowardly way out, because when the patient hears the word treatment, they hear the word cure. But when the doctor uses the word treatment, all they're thinking about is maybe 2 or 3 days of hideous pain, or extension life of 2 or 3 days. And so there's a complete mismatch and misunderstanding. Doctors aren't very good at this either. We know from Atal Gawande's famous book, Being Mortal, that doctors do not get trained in end-of-life issues, and it's a big omission in their training. But your question, how do we talk to our loved ones about this? Not easy, and it takes courage.
Yeah, so much what you said just is so appropriate. And what I found, one of the primary purposes that my father chose MAID was he didn't want to burden myself and my sisters, as the Parkinson's continued to really degenerate his body. So I think that's one of the avenues, as well as either from the patient themselves or the elderly person says, "I don't want to burden you. Let's talk about this," because just a terrible situation, either through disease or through injury, something happens and somebody is debilitated. And now if they haven't put that forth, like you say, in a legacy will or healthcare directive, now their loved ones or whomever that spouse is put in this position of making these decisions and trying to put themselves, just terrible, terrible situation.
Yeah. And Dan, you mentioned advanced directives. Let me just address that for 1 second, in case some of your viewers may not be familiar with it. Most of them will be. But an advanced directive, as you know, but your viewers may not. Advanced directive is a piece of paper, has legal weight, and it basically says how you want to be treated when you can no longer talk for yourself. And you also specify a healthcare agent or a proxy or a medical power of attorney, somebody who can talk for you when you can no longer talk for yourself. Very, very important. It must be supplemented by conversations with your doctor and with your loved ones. But it's shocking. In this country, only 40% of people have done advanced directives. This is shocking, because this means that for that 60%, when they die or when they get sick or when they're in the ICU, nobody is what do they want? What did Dad want? Did he want to have CPR? Did he want to be intubated? Did he want to have that paid for? We don't know what he wanted. So it's a very loving thing to do an advanced directive, because you're helping your loved ones help you when you're sick and dying. And also, by the way, the figure for communities of color, the figure is down to 20% for very good reasons.
Wow.
African Americans and other minorities don't trust we need to go into this day, but don't trust the medical system as much as white people do. So there's even worse there. So this is terrible. We need to raise those percentages so more people will do them. And also, let me just quickly mention, Dan, that your dad had Parkinson's, but a very common disease, as we all know, is dementia. Alzheimer's is a big one in dementia, but dementia. And people need to add to their advanced directives a dementia rider, a piece of paper which says how you want to be treated if you get dementia. I think we have now in this country 10 million people, in America, 10 million people who have dementia. That number is rising fast as the baby boomers, I'm a baby boomer, as the baby boomers get old and and frail, and as medicine so cleverly prolongs our lives, more people are going to get dementia. And so we need to tell people how we want to be treated. And that's what a dementia rider is. And by the way, a quick aside, the best dementia rider is the one from Compassion and Choices. Your listeners can find it on the Compassion and Choices website. Just Google Compassion and Choices. Very good nonprofit organization, excellent nonprofit organization. And just go to on their website. Just look for dementia. It's called Dementia Values. Something that you'll find it very quickly. Anyway, it takes 20 minutes to fill out, print it out, add it to your advanced directive, and then people know what you want at the end of life if you get dementia.
Excellent information, and yeah, that's a wonderful resource there. That website, as is the Final Exit Network that I know that you're a board organist. But before we do, I do want to go back to your book. Here it is on Amazon. You've got great reviews, wonderful reviews, as well deserved. An amazing book, as I said. It combines the practicalities with some intimacy and personal some stories and just wonderful. So folks can get that on Amazon, as well as potentially some other places as well. So well done. Can you describe a little bit about how that came to be? I mean, I know we talked a little bit about how you got into the end of life choice and the aging and dying, but specifically, how did you decide to write a book of this nature?
Well, I was learning about all these subjects, and I wanted to pass on my learning. I also couldn't find a book quite like mine, so I wrote the book I wish I could have read, and the book is just designed to help people. And one of the first chapters in the book is called "Living Well to Die Well," and the essence of that chapter, I learned, I'm a hospice volunteer, and I'm very active in hospice, and I learned from hospice nurses that people who tend to live well tend to have better deaths. And by living well, I don't mean have a fancy house, have a car, have a boat, nothing. No, nothing. I mean, when I living well, I mean somebody who is basically a decent person, who's considerate, who's a good family member, who's loyal to their friends, and, just a good person who helps other people. If you live a life like that, you're more likely, hospice nurses say to me, that to have a more pain-free and death. So that's where the book starts, and it goes through all those things we need to do before death, like advanced directives, dementia riders, death cleaning, caregiving, all these things. And then it goes into things that happen around death, VSAID, voluntarily stopping eating, drinking, medicalized in dying, the way your father died in Switzerland. Over there, they call it VAD, voluntary assisted dying. And then it ends up, obviously, with funeral planning, green burial, alkaline hydrolysis, human composting, all those things. So the book is really a guide for all of us, anybody, so to achieve a more peaceful, gentle death.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about that, but the reference, I'd actually written it down in that chapter about how we die, and specifically that hospice nurse. And she said, for the most part, when people die slowly, they die for the most part in a way that reflects their character and personality, as they lived. So if someone's, grumpy and mean, then that's maybe sometimes the way they die. But if you're, happy and more affable, then you can pass on that way.
Exactly.
When you're writing the book, did you come across any objections or any difficulty of people not wanting to talk about it, or
Yeah, no, a lot. I remember saying with dinner with some friends, my wife and I were, and I said to them, "Well, now, as you get older, how are you going to handle this?" And they'd be, "No, we don't want to talk about that." That was quite a common reaction, but the other thing, Dan, I find is that people, once they begin to learn about it, they get very intrigued. What happens, in green burial? What is that? How does that work? And you mean dementia rider? You mean I can actually write down what I want if I get dementia? And you mean I have choices at the end of life? I just don't drift into it, but I can actually choose. I choose between if I'm suffering unbearably. You mean I can hasten my death by a few days or a week, as if I want to do that? I didn't know that. So people, once they actually begin, their initial reaction is, "Don't talk to me about it. I don't want to get in there," but because it's too morbid. But most people, once they start learning about it, they find it very intriguing and fascinating topics because there are many topics under the end of life umbrella. So, yeah.
Terrific. One of the chapters you talk about is community in dying, that it used to be a community event. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yes. I mean, when people used to, before the Civil War, people would die and they would be laid out in the parlor and they'd be washed. And then neighbors would come by and talk and swap stories as they looked at the dead body and commiserate and offer condolences. It's very much a community event. And then the body would be wrapped in a shawl, put in maybe a wooden casket, and taken out and buried in the churchyard or at the family property. And that's what we now call a green burial, by the way. But it was a community event, and what has happened as medicine has risen, starting in sort of the 1920s and so roughly, we handed death away from the community and into hospitals and into doctors, and that's been a big, I think, some disappointment there because we've become unfamiliar with death. We don't know about it. We don't see it. People are put away in nursing homes and ICUs and kind of hidden all as if it was an awkward embarrassment, an awkward, oh my gosh, And so we've become very ignorant of what death looks like, how to handle it. We don't know what to do. And part of the goal of my book and the goal of your book is to help people to overcome some of that ignorance, to help people become more familiar with what to do. So yeah, it is a community dying. We've come to see dying as a medical event, and it shouldn't be. It's more a social, sacred community event. People come together to commemorate, to offer condolences, to help each other. This is the key thing to remember at death and dying. It's a time for people to gather, not to be surrounded by doctors, but to be surrounded by loved ones.
Absolutely. It seems like we've institutionalized it, in these care facilities that people hardly, visit anymore. It's a real shame.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about just, how, other than the medical aspect of it, from a social aspect, have you seen how it's changed just over the recent decades? Because we haven't been able to shatter that taboo. And you'd think with, society now with so much that's now out in the open, more progressive, but death seems to lag behind that.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that's helped there a little bit is hospice, the growth of hospice care. And I'm a big fan of hospice care. This is when you give up curative care and accept that you're going to die. And the doctor has to ascertain that you're within roughly within 6 months, and likely to die within 6 months. And you give up curative care so hospice helps you die more peacefully. It gentles the process. It helps you live to the fullest as you're approaching death, and also it helps the family. It gives you a team of people, doctors, nurses, social workers, volunteers like myself, to help you. It's very, very good, and the length of stay is far too short. I mean, people don't come to hospice soon enough, and partly doctors are to blame because they keep saying, instead of saying to a dying person, I've done all I can. I'm so sorry. It's time for you to go to hospice. But they don't do that. It's much easier for a doctor to be cowardly and say, there's a new treatment from John Hopkins. Let's try that, knowing damn well it's not going to do any good at all. But so I think people need to go to hospice more, taking more advantage of it. The thing we hear in hospice over and over again is, I wish I had started this earlier. Because it's so because they bring equipment, they bring a potty, they bring a commode, they bring a hospital bed, they bring medicines, they give you morphine to give, and they teach this. One thing hospice doesn't do is give you 24/7 care. So there's still a lot of work required by the family. But it's
Yeah, I can't speak highly enough about hospice. As I mentioned earlier, my mother was under hospice care. My mother had pancreatic cancer, which is just a horrid disease. And she had, I think it was about 9 months from when she was diagnosed to eventual death. She didn't, other than she had one surgery that was not successful. Other than that, relatively short stay in the hospital, maybe a week. She didn't spend another day in the hospital. And as I mentioned, she was able to die in her own bed, overlooking the ocean with a rose garden, right outside her bedroom, under the care of hospice. And they were just so, caring and so sensitive. And it really helped us as family members, knowing that my mom was not in pain because, pancreatic cancer is significantly painful, but, under the morphine and it just made, as I mentioned, the process relatively peaceful.
I'm
Beautiful.
so glad to hear that. I'm good for your mom. And let me just a quick word here about for-profit versus non-profit hospices. I recommend people to go to, if they can, non-profit hospices. There are some non-profit hospices that sometimes let you down, and there are for-profit hospices that will occasionally do a good job. But in general, non-profit hospices tend to be better. For example, they offer non-pharmacological treatments like hand therapy, pet therapy, art therapy, music, things like this. And so given a choice, but the other key thing is to interview a hospice. Don't go to any hospice, interview them. Because if you go to a hospice, say, run by the Catholic Church, the Catholic Church is wonderful. My wife is a Roman Catholic. But if you go to a hospital run by a Roman Catholic Church and you would like to take advantage of, say, voluntarily stopping eating and drinking to hasten your death because you're suffering unbearably, the Roman Catholic run hospice is not going to be sympathetic. It's not going to be supportive. You need to interview the hospice before you go there to make sure their values and your values are in alignment.
Well said. Good recommendation. So I don't need to tell you or our listeners that we're in some pretty divisive times right now. And have you found that the current kind of hyper political environment has affected the dying and death conversation at all?
Well, it has, in the sense that that the American administration is not sympathetic to choice in dying, and that was explicitly written down in the 2025 report on which this administration is based. This question about choice in dying is fraught because people of very good motives and noble character can disagree on this.
Certainly.
And there are good people who will say that it's up to God to decide when you are going to die, and we should not interfere in that process. And so I encourage people who think along those lines to hold those opinions. They have every right to hold those opinions. I have a different opinion. I think people should have some choices in dying, and if they're suffering intractably with intractable pain, they're suffering horribly like your dad was, then they should have the right to hasten their deaths if they want to. I believe people should have autonomy. People should have agency over their body. People should, I strongly believe in patient-directed care, and that people should have the choice of what to do. So I think we are polarized. This America is polarized, and it's very sad. I hope more unity will come to the country. But there's a battle going on over choice in dying. Your dad chose to go to Switzerland. Switzerland has these progressive laws which allow non-residents to go there, and your dad took advantage of that, and good for him. Some people would like to sort of close off that avenue, and I don't agree with that. So there's a fight, but I just want to say that there are good people involved, and I think hopefully people will treat each other with respect, and even when they disagree, and listen to each other and learn from each other. That's all we can hope for.
Yeah, I totally agree. My sister, when she found out that my father was going to pursue that medical assistance in dying, struggled with it initially from a spiritual and religious standpoint. So she went to her rabbi, Reform Judaism, and asked, and his interpretation, and it's by no means universal, either in any particular religion or congregation, but his interpretation was, well, God gives us free will. And part of free will is, as you say, having that autonomy. And if the body, if the soul is suffering to the degree that it is, significant suffering with no hope of healing, then in exercising free will in a way that is ethically and legally proper, that it should not be a sin. So she took that and she found comfort with that and was able then to fully support my father. So I think, as you mentioned, there's certain variables and different along the continuum of where you are, and not trying to force anyone's opinion on anyone else or anyone's religion on anyone else, but hopefully people can at least show that compassion and empathy. And if nothing else, they may not agree with it, but hopefully they can understand and, as I said, have compassion with folks that do decide to make that choice.
Yeah. Well, I just want to commend your sister for going to talk to that rabbi. I commend her rabbi for being so empathic and I love stories like that. I mean, that's in telling that story. I just see a lot of wisdom in that story from that rabbi, and that's all each of us can do, is to approach this with as much honesty and candor and wisdom as we can muster. That's all we can do.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked about like a bad death, what could happen. What about a good death? Can you describe a little bit about your experience and others with a good death?
Yeah. So Dan, good death that term actually is sort of puzzling, isn't it? Because I mean, a lot of people see my book and they say, achieving a good death. Wait a minute, Chris, a good death? How can a death ever be good? That's the end of our projects, relationships, and so on. If you're religious, it may not be the end of everything, but into the end of life as we know it. And how can that ever be good? It makes no sense. So that's a good point. It's a fair point, fair criticism. And the way I answer it is that by a bad death, I mean a lot of pain and suffering and isolation and loneliness. That is a bad death. By a good death, I mean you're surrounded by your family. You feel at ease. You've said the things you need to say. You've said to people, I love you. Thank you. Please forgive me. I forgive you. If there's a Jermaine, goodbye. And you've had a chance to talk, and you've had your advanced directive followed. This is what these are some aspects of a good death. You've had your dementia rider followed if you got dementia. Your doctor has been open and candid with you and told you so and said, I think you may have 4 weeks left. You can plan a bit. So, well, I got 4 weeks. Okay, I'm going to do the A, B, C, and D. So, it makes me mad when doctors don't say this and doctors don't even tell you. So people die and they don't even know, they sort of sense they're dying, but they don't really know. And so they don't have those key conversations. They don't have a chance to say, I love you, and so on. So a good death is gentle, peaceful, dignified. It's in alignment with the person's values and advanced directive, and also I think a good death is where reconciliations can happen. I mean, some of your readers, our listeners may have read the historian David McCullough's famous book about the Wright brothers, Orville and Wilbur, who created Flight in 1903. And what's often not known about them is they had a sister who was devoted to them, and absolutely devoted to them, and helped make their work possible. When she was 50, she fell in love and married somebody. The brothers were so angry at her. They said, how could you betray us? Like, how could you leave us? How dare you do this? And they became estranged. They refused to talk with her. When she got to 80, she was dying on a deathbed. One of the brothers by then had died, but the remaining brother, I think it was Wilbur, came and they reconciled. So reconciliations can happen. And when they do, it's wonderful. The amount of estrangement and alienation in families, to me, is shocking. If I'm talking to an audience of 500 people, which I often do, and I say to them, as I often do, how many of you have alienation and estrangement in your families? Half the people raise their hand. I have it in my family. My brothers, Tim, his children, 3 children, are not talking to each other because they quarreled, came into conflict over his estate. So this is shocking to me. So anyway, the whole point is that a good death is marked by if it's relevant, reconciliations, people come together and forgiving each other at the end. So those are some aspects, Dan, of a good death. Very important. When you're lying in your deathbed, you don't want to be anxious. You don't want to be full of regrets. Oh, why didn't I tell my daughter how much I loved her? No, you want to have written ethical will and obviously have a legal will. You do not want to die intestate without a will, but you need an ethical will and a living will, another word for an advanced directive. And so this is why your book and my book are so important for people, because it will help them live more intentionally so that they don't come to the end of their lives living haphazardly and not knowing what to do, not knowing what they want done with their body, not knowing if they want a memorial service. So we all need to live with more intention, with more planning and preparation, so we can come to the end of our lives at peace.
Perfect transition to the last topic or subject that I wanted to ask you about, and that's the importance of having a purpose in life. You speak about that, or you write about that in your book. Could you just take a couple moments to speak about that?
Yes, well, Dan, I'm looking at you. You're a Top Gun graduate. You've been a combat veteran. You've been a trial attorney. You're an author. You're an advocate for choice in dying. Now, that's what I call living a life of purpose. And you were devoted to your dad, as you describe in your book, Wingman. You took your dad to Switzerland. You've lived a life of purpose. So I just commend you for that. And I think it is incredibly important, as you have shown in your life, to live with meaning and purpose. But that's not easy. It's not easy, and it's not obvious. It's not that it is somewhere there we need to find it. No, we have to create it ourselves. And this is why it's so important to think hard about this. I strongly believe in having a personal mission statement, a credo, if you like, which lays out what your values are, what you want to achieve. This helps you to live a more intentional life. It helps you to find purpose and meaning. When I was in my 20s, I was very unhappy, very unhappy. On the surface, I looked successful. I was in the British Navy. I was getting degrees. I had lots of friends, went to parties, all that stuff. I was so miserable. And it took me a few years to understand what was going on. What was going on is I didn't know where I was going, what I was living for, what my life was about, what I was willing to die for. I knew nothing. I was just on the surface of life, drifting along, so unhappy. And I had no purpose and meaning. And suddenly, one day when I was about 25, I had this slap to the forehead realization, epiphany, if you like, that what I needed to do was to put in writing what I cared about, what I wanted to accomplish with my life. And that's what I did. And I've been working on that personal mission statement now for 50 plus years. And it's been a blessing. It's helped me be much happier person, much more at peace. When I go off the tracks, which I often do, I'd make a mistake. I get querulous or grumpy, or I do something stupid. I just go back to that personal mission statement and reread it and get back on track, forgive myself for any mistakes I've made, and then just start again. And this is what life is all about, having intentions, having a vision of the life you need. The Bible says, without a vision, the people perish. And I'm not a religious person, but that is so true. Without a vision, we perish. We all need a vision, and then we need to produce goals based on that vision, and then we need to take action based on those goals. So this is, living a purposeful life, I think is so important. And I'm grateful to you for asking me about it.
Well, thank you for sharing those thoughts. And as we've mentioned, as your book spends a lot of time with, it's a Dying with Dignity podcast, book is Achieving a Good Death, but really so much of that is the beforehand and the life and living a good life, before you have a good death.
And by the way, yes, thank you, Dan. By the way, Dan, you mentioned Final Exit Network, and we both know Michelle Whitty, who's the executive director, and this is our latest issue of the magazine, and on page 14 in this book is an article by you. An
Yes.
excellent article by you on page 14 about your book and about your dad. Here it is: being Pop's wingman. Pop is what you called your dad, David. You called him Pop, and here's the article: being Pop's wingman by Daniel Ziberoff. You fan member. So I just want to say that so many of our listeners will have heard of your book and know that your dad got Parkinson's disease, know that you accompanied him to Switzerland. They may want to know more about the Swiss option. And this issue of this magazine is actually a very good. The whole issue is devoted to the Swiss option. So your dad used the nonprofit Pegasus, and it talks about. There's a whole thing in there about it. So I just want to recommend to your viewers this Final Exit Network. This website is finalexitnetwork.org. Michelle Whitty is the ED, the executive director. Very fine organization. I'm proud to serve on this board. I know, Dan, you're and helping the organization. I just wanted to recommend to your viewers the Final Exit Network.
Thanks for sharing that with the viewers and the listeners. In fact, Michelle was my inaugural guest. So wonderful. We spoke a lot about Final Exit Network, and I'll make sure I'll put the link in this as well. So thank you for sharing that.
And one other thing I'd like to share with your... Oh, sorry.
I was just going to put up your book one more time on Amazon.
That's so nice of you.
Achieving a Good Death, a Practical Guide to End of Life, as we've been talking about here by Chris Palmer.
Thank you so much, Dan. And I just want to mention for your viewers another very good organization. I know you know of it, the Academy of Aid in Dying Medicine. And don't worry if don't worry, I'm saying this to your viewers, don't worry if you don't grasp that. But just go to the website, which is AADM, that stands for Academy of Aid in Dying Medicine, aadm.org, run by Lonnie Shavelson, an outstanding guy. But it's for those people who want to learn more about what happened to your dad with medical aid in dying. It's a very good, very informative and useful website. So I recommend it.
So Chris, before we leave, I just want to know what's on tap, because as you say, you've got a mission statement, 26 pages. You've done so much, but something tells me you're continuing to move forward. What's
yes?
What's
Well,
the latest?
I serve on a lot of boards, which I love doing. I give 3 or 4 talks a week to community groups. Everything I do is pro bono. In fact, all these proceeds from my books, including Achieving Good Death, go to fund student scholarships at American University, where I was a professor for 14 years. But I give a lot of talks. I serve on boards, and I'm writing a new book about humor and jokes and how they reveal wisdom and truth and insight. There'll be a big chunk of that book will be devoted to humor and death and dying. So I'm writing books, and I'm giving a lot of talks, and I'm trying to pack in as much as I can before I come to the end of my life.
Well, wonderful. The zest for life that you exude is contagious. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for appearing. And I just so look forward to our continued paths crossing in the future. Thank you, Chris Palmer.
Dan, thank you for having me. It's been an honor to be with you. It was a great conversation. I appreciate being with you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Well, and we'll have to do it again because there's more to cover sometime.
Love to do it again.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Sure. Bye-bye.